She wasn't sick. She was being relied on. The Hart residence in Beverly Hills went quiet early every night, not because the house was peaceful, but because everyone had learned to be careful. Edwin Hart stood in the hallway with his phone pressed tightly to his ear. He was a billionaire, used to commanding rooms, but lately his voice lowered whenever doctors spoke. "So this is normal?" Edwin asked quietly, rubbing his temple. "All of it." The doctor on the line assured him it was. Children grieved differently, he said. Some needed more structure than others. Behind Edwin, his 6-year-old daughter sat on her bed with her legs folded beneath her, a teddy bear tucked firmly under her chin. Nola Hart had learned to stay very still when adults talked about her. "I'll be good tonight, Daddy," Nola said softly, before he could even turn around. Edwin looked at her then, surprised by how prepared she sounded. "You don't need to worry about me, sweetheart," he told her, forcing a smile. Nola nodded anyway. She always did. From the doorway, Yvonne Lawson watched the exchange without speaking. She had worked in the Hart home long enough to understand its rhythms, the grief that still lingered, the grandmother who ran the house with quiet authority, the father who trusted professionals more than instincts. But she had never heard a child sound relieved to make herself smaller. "What does being good mean, baby?" Yvonne asked gently, stepping closer. Nola hesitated, her fingers tightening around the teddy bear. "It means Daddy can sleep," she answered. Edwin's hand shifted on the phone. Yvonne felt something settle heavily in her chest. Nola Hart wasn't fragile. She wasn't failing. She was holding something up that should never have been hers. And whatever was helping her do that had been hidden carefully. What Yvonne didn't know yet was that the truth wasn't in the hospital reports or the doctor's reassurances. It was sewn into the place Nola rested her head every night. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The Hart house had rules, not the kind written on paper, but the kind that hung in the air like invisible wire, tight cold, and sharp if you leaned too hard against them. Nola's illness wasn't discussed. It was simply accepted, like the marble floors, like the imported curtains, like the silence that pressed down on every room after 8 p.m. Yvonne noticed it the second evening. She'd been folding towels in the linen closet when she heard Edwin's voice drift from Nola's bedroom. It was soft, tender even, but there was something beneath it, something that made her pause. "Sweetheart, Daddy just needs you to rest tonight, okay?" There was a long silence. Then Nola's small voice, barely audible. "I'll be good." Yvonne's hand stilled on the towel. "I'll be good. Not okay, Daddy. Not I'm tired anyway. Just obedience. Relief, almost. As if staying in her room was a favor she could offer. A way to earn peace." Yvonne set the towel down and moved quietly toward the hallway. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in her chest had tightened, and she needed to see. Through the cracked door, she watched Edwin tuck the blanket around his daughter. His movements were careful, gentle. He kissed her forehead, lingering just a moment too long, as if trying to memorize her. Then he left, and Nola lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. Yvonne backed away slowly, her breath shallow. Later that night, she stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the cold marble counter. The house was silent, too silent, the kind of quiet that felt like held breath. She whispered to herself, barely aware she was speaking aloud. Children shouldn't sound relieved to disappear. But in this house, disappearing was treated like love. Some cages are built with silk and good intentions. Have you ever mistaken control for protection? Something in the house is broken, but everyone treats it as care. Yvonne found Nola sitting cross-legged on the bedroom floor the next afternoon, staring at her hands. The curtains were drawn. The room smelled faintly of lavender and something medicinal. "Hey, sweetheart," Yvonne said softly, stepping inside. "You hungry?" Nola looked up. Her face was calm, too calm for a child who'd barely left her room in days. "I'm okay," she said. "I don't want to be a bother." Yvonne crouched down beside her. "You're not a bother, Nola. You're a little girl. You're supposed to ask for things." Nola's eyes flickered, just for a second, like she wanted to believe that. But then the calm returned, smooth and practiced. Daddy sleeps better when I don't cry. The words came out flat, rehearsed, like lines from a script she'd memorized long ago. Yvonne's chest tightened. Who told you that, baby? Nola blinked, her brow furrowing slightly as if the question itself was strange. It's just what we say. We. Not I think. Not Daddy said. Just we. As if it were a fact. A rule. A truth everyone in the house had agreed upon without ever speaking it aloud. Yvonne reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from Nola's face. The girl didn't flinch. Didn't lean into the touch either. She just sat there, perfectly still, like she was waiting for permission to feel. Baby, Yvonne whispered, you don't have to take care of your daddy. That's not your job. Nola tilted her head, confused. But if I'm good, he's not sad. Yvonne's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught, because Nola wasn't upset. She wasn't crying or angry or scared. She was calm, and that was the most terrifying part. Later, Yvonne stood in the hallway, replaying the conversation in her mind. The phrasing, the tone, the eerie maturity in a 6-year-old's voice. Nola wasn't sick. She was trained. When a child speaks like an adult, someone taught them to survive instead of live. How many times have you repeated something you didn't understand, just because it kept the peace? The child didn't invent these words. The consultation happened in Edwin's study, a room lined with dark wood and leather-bound books that had never been opened. 3 people sat across from him, a pediatric psychologist, the family's personal physician, and Margaret Hart, who occupied her chair like a throne. Yvonne had been asked to bring tea. She wasn't supposed to stay, but she lingered near the door, silent, listening. Mr. Hart, the doctor said, his voice smooth and clinical. I understand your concern, but what you're describing, withdrawal, emotional flatness, it's not uncommon in children processing trauma. Edwin leaned forward, fingers pressed to his temples. But she barely speaks anymore. She doesn't play. She just sits. The psychologist nodded sympathetically. Children adapt. That's resilience. She's finding ways to cope. With time and structure, she'll stabilize. Adapt. They all sounded reasonable. Every word was wrapped in care, in expertise. Margaret folded her hands in her lap, her expression calm but unyielding. Edwin, grief doesn't follow a schedule, but routine keeps it from spreading. Nola needs stability, not more disruption. I just want her to feel safe, Edwin murmured. She does, Margaret said firmly, because you've created order. That's love. But when everyone agrees something is right, who's left to say it's wrong? Yvonne's hand tightened on the tray. The administrator from the care agency chimed in, his tone measured and professional. Mr. Hart, I should mention, sometimes caregivers project concern where none exists, especially newer staff. It's well-intentioned, but it can create unnecessary alarm. Edwin glanced toward the door, but didn't see her. Yvonne's been wonderful. I'm not. Of course, the administrator said smoothly. I'm only saying that emotional involvement can cloud judgment. You've assembled an excellent team. Trust the process. Margaret nodded. Trust what's working, Edwin. Don't let fear undo progress. The doctor stood, shaking Edwin's hand. Continue the routine. Keep her calm. She'll come through this. Yvonne slipped out before anyone noticed her. She set the tray down in the kitchen, her hands trembling. Have you ever stayed silent because the people in charge seemed so sure? She looked back toward the study. Through the cracked door, she could still hear their voices, calm, confident, united. No one sounds cruel, and that's the danger. The house settled into its nightly silence just after 9. Yvonne had learned the rhythm by now. The soft click of Edwin's office door, the hum of the security system arming itself, the way every sound seemed to fold inward until there was nothing but stillness. She was walking past Nola's room when she heard it. A voice. Faint, almost a whisper. She stopped, her hand hovering near the doorframe. The door was cracked just enough to see inside. Nola sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly. The worst prisons are the ones we're taught to build ourselves. Mommy says Daddy needs me. Yvonne's breath caught. The voice was Nola's, but the words didn't belong to a child. There was a pause, then another sound. Muffled, soft, like it was coming from under fabric or through a pillow. Be gentle. Be quiet. When a mother's voice becomes a manual for survival, who's really speaking? Yvonne's hand tightened on the doorframe. The voice wasn't Nola's. It was recorded. Yvonne pushed the door open slowly. Nola, who are you talking to? Nola gasped and spun around, clutching something to her chest. Her eyes went wide, not with surprise, but with fear. The fear of being caught. Nothing, Nola stammered. I was just... Yvonne stepped closer, her heart pounding. In Nola's arms was a small stuffed bear. Old, worn, and tucked inside its back was a tiny speaker, still faintly humming. Baby, Yvonne said gently, kneeling down. What is that? Nola's lip trembled. She looked down at the bear, then back at Yvonne. It's Mommy, she whispered. Yvonne reached out slowly. Nola hesitated, then handed over the bear. Yvonne pressed the worn fabric near the speaker. Clara Hart's voice played again, soft and soothing. Be gentle. Be quiet. Daddy needs you. Have you ever held on to something because everyone told you it was helping, even when it hurt? Yvonne looked at Nola, her throat tight. The little girl wasn't calling for help. She was comforting herself with instructions, with commands disguised as love. Yvonne realizes the comfort isn't coming from Nola. Yvonne couldn't sleep. The image of Nola clutching that bear, whispering to a ghost sewn into fabric, played over and over in her mind. She tucked the girl back into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered that everything would be okay. But she didn't believe it. At 2 a.m., Yvonne found herself standing in Nola's doorway again. The child was asleep, her breathing soft and even. Sometimes the answers we're afraid to find are the ones we need most. Yvonne's eyes drifted to the bed, to the pillow beneath Nola's head. It was lumpy, uneven, like something was stuffed inside that didn't belong. Her heart began to pound. She moved quietly into the room, carefully lifting Nola's head and sliding the pillow out. The girl stirred but didn't wake. Yvonne carried it into the hallway, her hands trembling. She felt along the seams. There, a small tear in the fabric, crudely stitched closed. She grabbed scissors from the linen closet. When you pull at one thread, the whole thing unravels. The first cut was hesitant. The second was not. The fabric split open, and objects tumbled onto the floor. A small vial of pills. A folded note, yellowed with age. A lock of hair tied with string. A photograph, bent and worn. Yvonne's breath caught. This doesn't belong to a child. Behind her, a door opened. Edwin stood in the hallway, disheveled and half awake. His eyes moved from Yvonne to the pillow, then to the objects scattered on the floor. What is all this? He asked, his voice disoriented, barely above a whisper. Before Yvonne could answer, a small voice came from the bedroom. Did I do it wrong? They both turned. Nola stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Not confusion, not surprise. Terror, like she'd been caught breaking a rule she didn't know how to follow. Edwin moved toward her. Sweetheart, what? I tried, Nola whispered, her voice cracking. I tried to keep them safe, like Mommy said. Yvonne's chest tightened. Have you ever uncovered something and realized the real horror wasn't what you found, but what it meant? Edwin knelt beside his daughter, his hands shaking. Nola, where did you get these? Nola's lip quivered. She looked at the scattered objects like they were pieces of herself she wasn't supposed to lose. They're Mommy's, she said softly. She told me to keep them close, so Daddy wouldn't forget. Edwin's face went white. Yvonne stared at the objects on the floor. The vial, the note, the hair. Everyone thinks the truth has been found, but it hasn't. Margaret arrived within the hour. She didn't knock. She simply walked into the house like she'd been summoned by instinct, her face calm, her posture regal even at 3 in the morning. Edwin stood in the living room, The objects from Nola's pillow spread across the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. His hands were shaking. His eyes were red. "Mother," he said, his voice hollow. "What is this?" Margaret glanced at the table. Her expression didn't change. Sometimes the cruelest people are the ones who never raise their voice. "It's Clara's system," she said simply. Yvonne stepped forward from the hallway, her arms crossed. "System." Margaret turned to her, calm and unbothered. "Yes, a structure she put in place before she passed, to help Edwin transition, to give Nola purpose." Edwin's face twisted. "Purpose? She's 6 years old." "And she was falling apart," Margaret said, her tone steady but firm. "You both were. Clara knew that. She recorded those messages. She left those items. She wanted Nola to feel connected to her, and to feel needed by you." "Needed," Edwin repeated, his voice breaking. "When love becomes a job, it stops being love." Margaret stepped closer, her eyes softening just slightly. "Edwin, listen to me. After Clara died, you stopped eating. You stopped sleeping. You could barely look at Nola without breaking down. The child saw that. She felt that. So you made her responsible for fixing it?" Yvonne's voice cut through the room like a blade. Margaret's gaze shifted to her, cool, assessing. "I gave her a way to cope. We all did. The recordings, the rituals, the reminders. They gave her control when everything else was chaos." "She's not supposed to control grief," Yvonne shot back. "She's supposed to feel it." "Feeling it was killing them both," Margaret said, her voice rising just slightly. "He was drowning. The child kept him afloat." Edwin staggered backward, his hand covering his mouth. "She's not medicine." "No," Margaret said quietly, "but she was all you had left." The room fell silent. Yvonne looked at Edwin. His shoulders were shaking. His breath was shallow. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to move forward or back. "Have you ever realized that the thing saving you was slowly destroying someone else?" Yvonne's voice softened, but it didn't waver. "She's a child, and she's tired." Margaret's jaw tightened. "If you dismantle this now, Edwin will collapse. Nola will lose the only structure she's ever known. You think you're saving her, but you'll shatter them both." Edwin looked at his mother, then at Yvonne, then at the objects on the table, pieces of his wife, weaponized into comfort. Stopping this will cost the family everything they used to survive. The bear was gone. So was the pillow, the recordings, the carefully hidden objects that had turned a child's bedroom into a shrine of duty. Nola sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty space where the bear used to be. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was blank. Sometimes the hardest part of freedom is not knowing what to do with it. Yvonne knocked softly on the doorframe. "Hey, baby, can I come in?" Nola nodded, but didn't look up. Yvonne sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nola's small voice broke the silence. "If I don't help, will you still stay?" Yvonne's chest tightened. She turned to look at the little girl, this child who had been taught that her value was measured in how quiet she could be, how helpful, how easy. "Baby," Yvonne said gently, "I'm not here because you help. I'm here because you're you." Nola's lip trembled. "But daddy he needs." "Your daddy needs to be your daddy," Yvonne said firmly, "not the other way around." Downstairs, Edwin sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Margaret had left hours ago, her parting words still echoing in his mind. "You're making a mistake." But for the first time in 2 years, Edwin wasn't sure she was right. When you've been numb for so long, feeling anything, even guilt, is terrifying. Yvonne appeared in the doorway, her expression soft but serious. "She's asking if we're going to leave." Edwin looked up, his eyes red. "Leave? She thinks her job was to keep you alive," Yvonne said quietly. "And now that she doesn't have that job anymore, she doesn't know why anyone would stay." Edwin's face crumpled. He covered his mouth with his hand, his shoulders shaking. "I did this," he whispered. "I let her think, God, I let her think she had to save me." Yvonne sat down across from him. You were drowning. I get that. But she was drowning too. And nobody noticed because she wasn't making noise. Have you ever been so focused on surviving that you didn't see who was carrying you? Edwin stood slowly, his legs unsteady. I need to talk to her. He found Nola still sitting on her bed, staring at nothing. Nola, he said softly. She looked up. Her eyes were guarded. Edwin sat beside her, his voice thick with shame. I should have stayed first. Nola blinked. What? You've been taking care of me, Edwin said, his voice breaking. And I let you think that was your job, that you had to fix me, that I'd fall apart if you didn't. Nola's chin trembled. But you were sad. I was, Edwin whispered. I still am sometimes. But that's not your fault. And it's not your job to fix. A tear slipped down Nola's cheek. Then another. Yvonne stepped into the doorway, watching quietly. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, a silent witness to something fragile beginning to heal. Healing feels strange when you've been carrying adults, she said softly. Nola turned to her, confused. Yvonne smiled gently. It means it's okay to feel lost right now. You're learning how to just be a kid again. Safety has returned, but innocence hasn't. 3 weeks later, the house felt different. Not perfect, not healed, but different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It didn't press down like a hand over the mouth. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when people stop performing and start living. Sometimes the loudest thing in a room is what nobody's saying anymore. Yvonne stood in the hallway outside Nola's room, watching through the cracked door. The little girl was asleep, really asleep. Not the stiff, anxious kind of sleep where her body stayed tense even in rest. This was soft, peaceful. No bear, no recordings, no whispered instructions from beyond the grave. Just a child, sleeping like children should. Edwin appeared beside Yvonne, his hands in his pockets. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. She didn't ask for the bear tonight, he said quietly. Yvonne nodded. She's learning she doesn't need it. Edwin exhaled slowly, his gaze distant. I thought strength meant control, keeping everything in order, making sure she didn't fall apart. She wasn't the one falling apart, Yvonne said gently. Edwin winced. No, she wasn't. Have you ever mistaken someone's silence for peace, when it was really just survival? Yvonne turned to face him. Sometimes strength means listening sooner, before the damage becomes the routine. Edwin nodded, his throat tight. I almost lost her trying to hold on to her. But you didn't, Yvonne said. You let go. That's what mattered. Later that night, Yvonne sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, staring out at the dark yard. Margaret hadn't returned. The doctors had stopped calling with reassurances. The system had been dismantled, and what remained was messy, uncertain, but real. When you stop asking a child to carry your grief, they finally get to be light again. Edwin joined her at the table, his voice soft. Thank you for staying, for seeing what I couldn't. Yvonne met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time, it wasn't a promise made out of duty. It was trust. A child should never be asked to heal an adult's grief. Love that demands silence is not care, it's weight. When we mistake a child's compliance for resilience, we teach them that their pain doesn't matter. Only ours does. Strength isn't about staying quiet. It's about being heard. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is stop pretending everything is fine. Upstairs, Nola stirred in her sleep. Her hand reached out, not for the bear, not for the pillow, but for nothing. And when she found nothing there, she didn't panic. She just rolled over and slept. The pillow is empty, and for the first time, so is the burden.